Have you ever wanted to do something good for God, only to be held back by God himself? Spain in the 16th century witnessed a man who from his youth turned his back on wealth to choose a life of austerity. A priest willing to sell all his possessions, becoming destitute, stands with the poor. And even when unjustly imprisoned, stripped of his freedom and honor, he still bowed his head in obedience, regarding prison as an extended spiritual retreat. That man was Saint John of Ávila, known as the Apostle of Andalusia, the patron saint of diocesan priests in Spain, a man who quietly renewed priestly life, laying the foundations for seminaries and academies. He was also the one standing behind the spiritual journeys of great saints such as Saint Teresa of Ávila, Saint John of God, and Saint Ignatius of Loyola. Before we enter that journey, let me know where in the world you are watching this video from, or leave a single word, Amen, as a sign of prayerful communion, so that together we may explore the life of Saint John of Ávila. What causes a child born to enjoy luxury to choose a path of austerity as if his heart already belonged to another kingdom? Saint John of Ávila was born in Almodóvar del Campo, a small yet prosperous town, into a family of wealth and social standing. The home in which he grew up lacked nothing that society of that time regarded as guaranteeing a secure future. His father, Alonso de Avila, was a man of Jewish origin who had converted to Catholicism, owned mineral mines, and was respected throughout the region. His mother, Marina, cared for her child with all the love and the very natural expectations a mother holds for her only son. Everything seemed already arranged, a smooth path, a safe life, a fitting position within society. Yet from his earliest years, a quiet dissonance appeared within Saint John of Ávila. It was not rebellion, nor a loud rejection of the world. The boy John simply was not drawn to the things that usually attract children in wealthy surroundings. Luxurious objects and the comforts prepared for him seemed unable to touch a very deep place within his interior life. This indifference did not appear cold or distant, but rather like a natural intuition, a sense that another order was silently calling. One of the anecdotes most often recalled by biographers is the story of the velvet garment. Out of love for her son, Marina had a costly velvet outfit made for him to wear on solemn occasions, as a sign of the family's status and also as a source of maternal pride. But John firmly refused. When refusal was no longer possible, he found a way to give it away. For him, wearing such luxury was difficult to reconcile with the image of the poor Christ whom he contemplated in prayer. He called it an offense, not against his family, but against what he believed to be the deepest truth. Adults were astonished, for such a choice came from a child, at an age when such clear discernment was not expected. That choice did not stop at outward gestures. Within the familiar space of his own home, Saint John of Ávila began a self-imposed discipline that no one required of him. Instead of sleeping on the soft bed prepared for a young heir, he often slipped down to the floor or lay on a hard wooden board on which to sleep. Not out of deprivation, nor to attract attention. He did it in silence, as a way of training himself to renounce comfort. For him, it was a way of dying to the world, a very rudimentary yet serious practice, far beyond the age at which one normally thinks of sacrifice. The prayer vigils of the young John further astonished his family and those around him. When the household had fallen asleep, he would quietly rise and go to a corner of the room or to the small chapel in the house to pray. Castile in winter is bitterly cold. The cold penetrates the skin and makes the body tremble. On some nights, he was found kneeling there, his body curled from the cold, yet his face marked by an unusual stillness. Amid the trembling of the body, his mind seemed entirely focused on what was unfolding within. The silence of the late night and the silence of the interior life merged, creating a space that felt more familiar to him than any other. That same silence also made him distant from the noisy games of children his own age. While others sought joy and lively amusements, John preferred to withdraw to quiet places. He did not despise the joys of others, but he did not seem to find himself in them. Instead, he turned to meditation, to being alone, as though a hidden dialogue were taking place, a dialogue without words, yet full of weight. Gradually, this unusual quality ceased to be merely private. Villagers began to recognize in the boy John something that exceeded childhood. They showed him a natural reverence, addressing him with more respectful forms of speech, not out of fear or superstition, but because they sensed a rare interior maturity. The childhood of Saint John of Ávila thus was not merely a phase of biological or psychological preparation, but a foretelling, a sign that this life would not follow familiar paths. In that wealthy house, amid comforts and expectations, a seed was quietly taking root. It did not grow through applause or the encouragement of crowds, but through small, discreet choices, repeated in silence. Those very choices shaped a direction, a way of being in the world, even before Saint John of Ávila could name what he was living. And the time would come when the silent choices of childhood would have to step beyond that wealthy home, to answer a larger question: for whom to live and where to go. If you have given everything to God, do you have the courage to give up even what you want to do for Him? After childhood years sheltered by family and quietly prepared in silence, the life of Saint John of Ávila entered a decisive turning point. The death of his parents not only left an emotional void, but also placed him before a very concrete reality. A large inheritance, sufficient to guarantee a secure and honorable life, now lay in the hands of a young man who had already grown accustomed to choosing a contrary path. This loss did not drive him to seek support in wealth, but rather revealed what had long been formed within his interior life. The silent choices of childhood now demanded a public, clear, and irrevocable decision. Saint John of Ávila chose to sell all his possessions and distribute everything to the poor. This was not an impulsive gesture, nor an act meant to impress. He gave everything away, keeping nothing back for his own security. In the social context of Spain at that time, such an action caused a shock. Almsgiving could be understood, but the complete renunciation of an entire inheritance was difficult to accept, especially when the person involved was still young and could look forward to a promising future. For Saint John of Ávila, giving was not symbolic, but a real severing from the path of wealth that had been set before him from birth. From that moment on, the life of poverty was no longer a private practice of childhood, but became the foundation of the entire road ahead. Saint John of Ávila chose to consecrate his whole life to God in the priestly vocation. This self-gift was not built on fleeting emotion, but on a conviction tested through concrete choices. He entered the priesthood with an interior life already accustomed to renunciation, with a vision trained to distinguish what is secondary from what is essential. From then on, his life no longer revolved around what he could do, but around who he was being called to become. It was precisely in this context that a great aspiration began to take shape. Mexico, a land only recently discovered, appeared as a new horizon. For many people of that era, the New World was a place of opportunity, power, and wealth. For Saint John of Ávila, it was a place of people who did not yet know God, souls who had not yet heard the gospel. With the zeal of a young priest, he longed to go there to proclaim Christ. This dream bore the mark of radical commitment, as though only by going very far away, leaving homeland and all that was familiar, could he fully respond to the love he had received. In 1527, Saint John of Ávila set out for the port of Seville to wait for a ship bound for the West Indies. The image of a man who had sold all his possessions, standing at the harbor with very meager belongings, but a heart ablaze with love, carries strong symbolic weight. It was a moment between two worlds. On one side was a past that had been closed. On the other, a future not yet opened. The ship had not yet departed, and that very waiting became a space of discernment. He stood there not as one who hesitated, but as one ready to go, if that was what God desired. During the waiting period, Saint John of Ávila did not choose rest or concealment. He began preaching in the local churches of Seville. It was precisely in those days that his preaching ability and theological depth began to be clearly recognized. His sermons were not marked by ostentatious rhetoric, but reached the conscience of the listeners. He spoke of sin and mercy, of conversion and interior life, with a conviction that flowed from his own lived experience. People began to take notice of the young priest, not because of fame, but because of the unity between his words and his way of life. It was also in Seville that Saint John of Ávila met Father Fernando de Contreras, a clergyman renowned for his holiness. Father Contreras was astonished when he heard his sermons. What moved him was not only theological knowledge, but the interior fire conveyed through every word. Father Contreras perceived a paradox. While many dreamed of conquering distant lands, right there in Andalusia, the faith of the people was growing cold, and the life of the clergy was in serious decline. Before him stood a man capable of responding to that urgent need. Without hesitation, Father Contreras sought out Archbishop Alonso Manrique de Lara, presented Saint John of Ávila to him, and asked that he be kept there. He spoke with urgency, saying that Spain could not allow this light to depart. The Archbishop summoned Saint John of Ávila. That meeting was decisive. Before him stood a difficult choice. On one side was the missionary dream he had nurtured with all his fervor. On the other hand was the call to remain and re-evangelize Andalusia, a mission less glamorous, but one that demanded perseverance and long-term fidelity. Saint John of Ávila chose obedience. He accepted the renunciation of the Mexican dream, not because that dream was mistaken, but because another call, more concrete, was placed before him through the Church. This decision did not erase the very human sense of regret, but placed that regret within a new order. He understood that offering oneself is not only about doing great things for God, but also about allowing God to shape the very way in which that offering is made. The ship that never left port became a quiet yet decisive sign. God did not lead Saint John of Ávila farther in a geographical sense, but led him deeper into the very field of his homeland that had grown dry. From here on, his path would not lead out to the open sea, but would open onto the rough roads of Andalusia, where his preaching and his life would begin a quiet yet far-reaching renewal. Can a priest touch the hearts of the poor, yet also touch the conscience of those who hold power without having to pay a price? After deciding to remain, Saint John of Ávila entered a new phase of his journey, a phase marked not by distant sea voyages, but by the dusty roads of southern Spain. Andalusia opened before him like a vast field, a place where faith had once flourished, but now bore many signs of dryness. He set out as one who had been sent, carrying very little baggage, yet bearing a conviction refined through renunciation and obedience. From large cities to remote villages, from crowded squares to small churches, he was present in the same way everywhere. Simple preaching, a poor way of life, and a rare interior freedom. The preaching of Saint John of Ávila quickly generated a distinctive attraction. It is said that whenever he preached, shops had to close because people flocked to hear him. This was not a passing phenomenon, but a sign of a spiritual hunger being awakened. People did not come for entertainment, nor to hear a gifted orator. They came because, in his words, they recognized a truth that touched the conscience, a call to conversion that was both demanding and full of hope. He spoke of sin, but not to condemn. He spoke of mercy, but not to lull. That combination created a weight that made listeners feel they were being called by name. That very power began to expose fractures within society. The radically poor lifestyle of Saint John of Ávila, together with his uncompromising preaching on money and moral responsibility, gradually touched the wealthy classes. For certain nobles and clerics, his words were no longer general moral advice, but a mirror reflecting the compromises by which they lived. Discomfort did not immediately erupt into open confrontation. It accumulated quietly, smoldering, turning into rumors, suspicions, and eventually into calculations aimed at weakening his influence. Meanwhile, Saint John of Ávila did not limit himself to preaching to the people. Through pastoral experience, he recognized a deep connection between the cooling of faith among the laity and the decline of the clergy. For him, calling the people to conversion while neglecting the formation of those who guided them was a serious omission. From this awareness, a strategic direction began to take shape. He believed that for faith to stand firm, priests were needed who were formed not only in knowledge, but also in interior life and virtue. From there, Saint John of Ávila committed himself to the reform of the clergy. He contributed to the founding of several seminaries and academies, including the University of Baeza. These institutions were not established to produce purely intellectual scholars, but to form shepherds capable of uniting intellect with spiritual life. This was a long-term endeavor, requiring patience and vision. He understood that the emotions stirred by a sermon could flare up and fade, but a well-formed clergy could sustain the faith of an entire region for many generations. That same commitment also made opposition more visible. In 1531, while teaching in Seville, Saint John of Ávila was denounced to the Inquisition. Those behind the accusations were largely wealthy clerics and nobles who felt targeted by his preaching and way of life. The principal charge was that he was said to have closed heaven to the rich and exaggerated the spiritual danger of wealth. In the social context of that time, sermons on poverty and moral responsibility could easily be interpreted as an attack on social class. In addition, the family background of Saint John of Ávila, with a father of Jewish origin who had converted to Catholicism, made suspicion even heavier. In an era when the Inquisition was particularly vigilant toward any sign deemed deviant, this factor became an added burden to the case. What he preached and what he lived were placed under the microscope of distrust, not to seek truth, but to find grounds for accusation. From the initial denunciations, the matter quickly escalated. Saint John of Ávila was arrested and imprisoned from the summer of 1532 until July 1533. This event pushed him from the pulpit into the prison cell, from the space of public speech into the space of bars and silence. His public ministry was abruptly cut short. One might think this was the end of his influence, or at least a wound to his reputation and spirit that would be difficult to heal. For Saint John of Ávila, unjust imprisonment was a painful turning point, but also a moment that revealed the depth of his interior life. He was not allowed to defend himself publicly. The words that had once shaken crowds were now replaced by enforced silence. It was precisely in this situation that a profound question arose. Could everything that had been built collapse because of a single trial? Could a mission continue when the one who bore it was stripped of his voice? In prison, everything was reduced to the bare minimum. There were no journeys, no sermons before crowds, no plans for reform. There remained only one man facing himself and God. That silence carried a particular weight because it was not chosen silence, but imposed silence. Yet it was precisely within that muteness that what was most essential in Saint John of Ávila began to emerge. Looking back on the path just traveled, from the decision to remain in Andalusia, the tireless journeys, the sermons that stirred hearts, to the work of forming the clergy, everything now seemed to be hanging in suspension. Yet precisely at the moment when everything appeared extinguished, something else was being prepared. The seeds sown in the hearts of the people and in the institutions of formation did not disappear. They were temporarily hidden, waiting for another time to bear fruit. When preaching was silenced by iron bars, what remained was silence. And it was within that silence that a work would be born. Some people are confined within four walls, yet it is precisely there that they learn the freedom of the soul. The prison closed in on Saint John of Ávila like a heavy door, cutting him off from the familiar roads of Andalusia, from the crowded pulpits, from the pastoral rhythm to which he had devoted all his strength. In that cramped space, everything that had once supported his public ministry disappeared. There were no longer the footsteps of crowds coming to hear him preach. No more exhausting journeys between villages. No more plans for priestly formation taking shape. There remained only one man standing naked before God and before himself. Saint John of Ávila received the time of imprisonment as a profound retreat, a school in which God himself was the teacher, where the lesson was not given in words, but through the stillness of the soul. In the first days of confinement, a sense of loss and injustice may have passed through his interior life, yet they did not become the center. Instead of allowing resentment or despair to take hold, Saint John of Ávila chose another attitude, quiet and radical. He did not turn this event into a battle of honor, nor did he seek to defend himself against false accusations. He also did not cultivate a desire to respond with sharp words. His silence was not passive resignation, but an interior decision to allow truth to be purified over time, to let God speak in his own way. It was precisely in that silence that the interior depth of Saint John of Ávila was opened in a new way. Stripped of all familiar means, he had nothing left to cling to except a direct relationship with God. The prison became the place where he reread his entire journey, from a quiet childhood to years of fervent preaching. Questions that had been obscured by activity now appeared more clearly. Here he began to understand that mission is not measured by external effectiveness, but by the degree to which one allows God to act through human fragility. During his imprisonment, Saint John of Ávila confided to Blessed Louis of Granada what was taking place within him. He revealed that it was precisely in prison that he learned more about the mystery of salvation and the love of God than in all the years of study at the university. That confession reveals a profound reversal. What had appeared outwardly as failure and humiliation became an interior unveiling. The prison, rather than extinguishing the light, caused that light to become more focused, more refined. It was also in this context that one of the most important fruits of his life took shape. Saint John of Ávila began writing most of the work, Audi, filia, in the darkness of the prison. His pen was not driven by ambition to publish or by academic prestige. It was driven by a deeper need, namely to express the interior path he himself was walking, a path of listening, discernment, and response to God's love in silence. Those pages bear the mark of imprisonment, as though darkness had been transformed into light through words distilled in prayer. Audi filia arose from a very concrete situation. At the beginning, the work was written for Sancha Carrillo, a young noblewoman longing to offer herself to God. Saint John of Ávila did not write for an anonymous crowd, but for a specific soul with very real concerns. That concreteness gives the work a particular depth. From the need for personal spiritual guidance, his reflections gradually opened toward a broader horizon, touching the foundational questions of Christian life. Listening to the voice of God, walking in interior freedom, and allowing grace to lead. In those pages, one recognizes a tone refined through trial. There is no longer the urgency of someone running between ministries, nor the pressure to persuade or to conquer. Instead, there is a slow, steady rhythm arising from the lived experience of a man who has passed through darkness and found light within it. The prison became the place where Saint John of Ávila's words were sifted, stripped of excess, retaining only what was essential. Time passed, and with it, the judicial process came to its conclusion. In July 1533, the Inquisition declared Saint John of Ávila completely innocent. His teachings were affirmed as morally sound, bearing no trace of deviation, as the previous accusations had claimed. This vindication not only restored his physical freedom, but also restored the honor of the mission he had lived and proclaimed. Yet for Saint John of Ávila, true freedom had already been learned earlier, during the days of imprisonment, when he placed his entire trust in God. The day he left the prison became a memorable event for the community of believers in Seville. A solemn mass was celebrated at the Church of San Salvador. When Saint John of Ávila ascended the pulpit, trumpets sounded, and the people cheered in welcome for the shepherd they loved. The scene carried a strong symbolic meaning. The man who had once been dragged from the pulpit under suspicion now returned amid reverence. The trial, rather than weakening his influence, caused his spiritual authority to spread even further. In the eyes of many, Saint John of Ávila had become a living saint, not because he had avoided suffering, but because he had allowed suffering to transform him. However, the most noteworthy thing did not lie in the applause or the public restoration of honor. After prison, Saint John of Ávila was no longer exactly the same person as before. Silence had left its mark. He returned to ministry with a new depth, greater interior freedom, and a more refined capacity for discernment. His preaching, from this point on, did not merely stir consciences, but bore fruit in concrete people, in souls seeking a path amid the darkness of the age. The prison closed one chapter, but it also opened another direction. If previously the strength of Saint John of Ávila lay in his ability to preach and organize, after this trial that strength began to manifest itself in a different way, quieter yet deeper. What was written in Audi, filia, and what was formed in silence would continue to spread, beyond the walls of the prison, beyond the city of Seville, and beyond his own lifetime. And yet, strangely enough, after the prison, the greatest strength of Saint John of Ávila no longer lay in the fact that he had been vindicated, but in the fact that his words began to give birth to new people. A soul that has been awakened can become too strong for the world, but if properly discerned, it becomes a path that saves others. On January 20th, 1539, the feast of Saint Sebastian, the city of Granada took on the familiar solemn atmosphere of a feast day. In that setting, Saint John of Ávila ascended the pulpit at the Hermitage of the Holy Martyrs. His sermon did not seek to please the crowd. His words were lit by an experience that had passed through silence, imprisonment, and vindication. He spoke of sin as a real wound within the human person, and of mercy as the path open to all who dare to face the truth about themselves. His voice was unhurried. Each sentence fell like steady blows upon the conscience, uncovering depths that people usually keep hidden. Among those listening that day was a man carrying a heavy past. He was John of God, at the time a seller of religious books, who had once lived as a mercenary soldier and bore many inner wounds. He entered the sermon as someone long accustomed to restlessness, carrying within himself memories that had never been healed. The preaching of Saint John of Ávila struck him like an arrow piercing straight into the deepest part of his soul. Words about sin and mercy did not remain on the surface. They opened a door that had long been shut. John of God's reaction unfolded in full view of the public. He collapsed to his knees, crying out, begging for mercy, his body and emotions seeming to overflow every social convention. For the crowd, the scene was disturbing and difficult to understand. They saw a man who had lost control, but they did not see the inner storm being released. In that moment, John of God experienced a violent conversion, as though his entire former life were overturned, exposing its naked truth. That powerful reaction quickly led to misunderstanding. The people of Granada believed that John of God had lost his mind. He was taken to the Hospital Real, the royal hospital, where those considered mentally ill were treated with the harsh methods of the time. Chains, beatings, and starvation were used as means to restore order. For John of God, the hospital doors closing behind him did not mark the end of his conversion, but another threshold, leading him into a world of shared suffering. Within the Hospital Real, John of God witnessed firsthand the cruelty endured by the mentally ill. He saw people abandoned, treated as objects, stripped of their dignity. His own pain merged with the pain of those around him, forming a deep compassion. In a place that seemed to contain only darkness, a new seed began to sprout. John of God realized that the love of God burning within him needed a concrete direction, a form of expression that could touch the bodies and destinies of the most afflicted. News of John of God's condition reached Saint John of Ávila. He did not remain on the sidelines. With a discernment forged through trial, Saint John of Ávila went to visit John of God in the hospital. The encounter took place in harsh surroundings, amid chains and cold stares. Saint John of Ávila did not scold, nor did he extinguish the flame that was burning. He saw in John of God a fierce love for God, one that needed guidance rather than restraint. Saint John of Ávila's counsel was brief yet decisive. He urged John of God to stop inflicting harm upon himself and to redirect all that fervor into a concrete action, serving those who suffered as he himself was suffering. Those words did not lessen the intensity of the conversation, but helped it find its proper form. John of God obeyed. He became calm in a striking way, as if he had found a new axis of balance for his soul. That very change opened the path for his release from the hospital. After leaving the hospital Real, John of God did not return to his former life. He began with very small steps. He rented a house and took in the poor and the sick who had been abandoned on the streets of Granada. His manner of care differed sharply from what society was accustomed to seeing. He treated each person with gentleness and respect, viewing them as human beings with dignity rather than as burdens. Such practices were revolutionary in the medical context of the time, when the sick were often regarded as objects to be controlled rather than persons to be loved. Saint John of Ávila continued to support John of God through spiritual guidance. He did not directly manage the work, but remained present as a firm point of support, helping John of God to discern and persevere on the new path. From the initial small group, a charism gradually took shape. Like-minded individuals gathered, sharing a common conviction that serving the suffering was a concrete way of serving God. The seeds sown in the Hospital Real began to bear fruit beyond all initial expectations. From those humble rooms, the Hospitaller Order of Saint John of God gradually came into being. It was not the result of a long-term strategic plan, but the fruit of a series of faithful acts of discernment. The intense love of God within John of God, when guided by Saint John of Ávila, became a path that saved lives, opening a new vision for the care of the sick and the poor. What began as an emotional eruption was transformed into a lasting mission. The story of Granada in 1539, therefore, carries a meaning far beyond a personal event. It shows the power of preaching when united with proper discernment. Saint John of Ávila recognized that an awakened soul must be guided so that its inner energy does not turn into self-destruction, but becomes a source of life for others. John of God, from a misunderstood and imprisoned man, became a pioneer of a charism of service that would endure for centuries. In that relationship, the role of Saint John of Ávila emerges clearly as that of a spiritual guide who knows how to listen and how to wait. He imposed no model and did not claim the center for himself. He helped another person find the right form in which to live his vocation fully. It is precisely this humility that allowed his influence to spread deeply, beyond what the eye can measure. A single piece of counsel can save a person from despair, and it can also open a path for history. Yet this would not be the last time Saint John of Ávila did so. There are moments when a human being comes face to face with death, and from that point on, every throne becomes too small. In 1539, amid the political setting and ceremonial life of the Spanish court, Saint Francis Borgia, then Duke of Gandia, was entrusted with a task of great honor and responsibility. He was required to escort the coffin of Empress Isabella from Madrid to Granada for burial. The journey unfolded with full solemnity, accompanied by all the symbols of power and dynastic order. For a man at the height of social prominence, this duty served as a confirmation of his position and of the trust placed in him by the court. Yet the decisive moment did not lie in the procession or the elaborate rites, but in the instant when the coffin was opened to verify the identity before burial. When the lid was lifted, Saint Francis Borgia was confronted with a stark reality. The body of the Empress, once renowned for her beauty, once honored and feared, had already begun to decompose. The sight struck directly at the deepest level of his sense of human existence. Beauty, power, glory, all appeared fragile in the face of the uncompromising destruction of death. That shock did not pass as a fleeting impression. It reached the very roots of what Saint Francis Borgia had believed and was living. Before his eyes, the illusion of power and status became undeniable. It was precisely in that moment that he uttered the vow that would become the defining marker of his life, that he would never again serve a Lord who could die. This vow was not an impulsive gesture, but an interior rupture, a breaking point with the old world to which he had belonged since birth. After this event, Saint Francis Borgia entered a period of profound existential crisis. He continued to fulfill his external duties, but inwardly, a great question had been posed. If all earthly power ends in decay, then what is truly worthy of a lifetime of dedication? That question found no answer within the familiar frameworks of court life. It compelled him to seek another space where questions of meaning and eternity could be asked without being obscured by ceremony and titles. In this state of inner upheaval, Saint Francis Borgia went to Granada, where he encountered Saint John of Ávila. He listened to his preaching and began to seek answers through a spiritual path, one that he had rarely entered with full seriousness before. The preaching of Saint John of Ávila did not attempt to soothe his unease, but placed it in the light of truth and mercy. For Saint Francis Borgia, this encounter marked a beginning, where crisis was recognized as an invitation rather than something to be avoided. From that point on, Saint John of Ávila became the spiritual director of Saint Francis Borgia. This relationship was not built on frequent public meetings, but through patient accompaniment, largely by correspondence and through deep spiritual guidance. Saint John of Ávila did not seek to soften the shock that Saint Francis Borgia had experienced. He helped him reread that event in the light of vocation, to recognize that the collapse of worldly illusions could open the way to a more complete self-offering. The process of discernment unfolded over a long period, marked by many interior struggles. Saint Francis Borgia had to confront very concrete bonds: family, responsibilities, inheritance, and honor. Saint John of Ávila neither forced nor hurried him. He allowed the truth to penetrate gradually, allowing the call to be recognized from within. It was precisely in this patience that Saint Francis Borgia began to see a new direction clearly, one in which renunciation was not a loss, but a way of entering into deeper freedom. After the death of his wife, Saint Francis Borgia made a radical decision. He renounced the title of Duke and his inheritance, leaving behind worldly glory to choose a poorer path. This decision caused shock because it ran counter to all social expectations. A man at the height of power voluntarily stepping down, accepting a humble life, was seen as a paradox difficult for many to understand. For Saint Francis Borgia, it was the natural consequence of the vow spoken before the coffin of Empress Isabella. The encouragement and discernment of Saint John of Ávila played an important role in this turning point. He helped Saint Francis Borgia see that joining the Society of Jesus was not an escape from responsibility, but a transformation of that responsibility into a new form. The Society of Jesus, still very young and poor at the time, demanded from its members a readiness for renunciation and a strong missionary spirit. For Saint Francis Borgia, this was the fitting environment in which to live fully what he had recognized in the moment of confronting death. Saint Francis Borgia entered the Society of Jesus and gradually assumed important responsibilities. His experience of court life, combined with a deep interior transformation, enabled him to serve the order with broad vision and a humility that had been forged through trial. He later became the third superior general of the Society of Jesus, playing a key role in strengthening and expanding the mission of spreading Catholicism across many regions. This path shows that renouncing worldly power did not make him less influential, but opened a different form of influence, deeper and more enduring. In the story of Saint Francis Borgia, one can clearly perceive the imprint of Saint John of Ávila. He did not occupy the central position, but was present as a guide who knew how to listen and how to wait. He did not impose a path, but helped a human being become free enough to enter his own path before God. From a duke to a religious, from power to vows, that journey bears the mark of patient and faithful discernment. The encounter between Saint Francis Borgia and Saint John of Ávila reveals an important dimension of the mission of Saint John of Ávila. He not only preached to crowds or supported the poor, but also accompanied those who stood at the height of power, helping them reread their lives in the light of eternity. In this way, he contributed to the formation of figures of great influence in the history of the Church, not through authority, but through discernment and fidelity. Yet Saint John of Ávila did not support only a duke or a sick person. He also stood behind other giants of the Church. A person who holds no power can still change history if he knows how to support, at the right moment, the souls chosen by God. After years of preaching, enduring trials, and accompanying vocations both great and small, Saint John of Ávila entered a role that became increasingly hidden, yet whose influence spread ever more widely. He did not stand at the head of reform movements, nor did he bear the title of founder of a religious order. His mission at this stage unfolded in more discreet spaces, where subtle discernment and fidelity to truth became the key. It was precisely here that Saint John of Ávila came to be recognized as a master, not of doctrines, but of souls. Within this context, Saint Teresa of Ávila emerged as a figure both radiant and fragile. Her profound spiritual experiences, her visions and interior graces, quickly drew attention and at the same time aroused suspicion. The 16th century was an era highly sensitive to any unusual spiritual manifestations. In such a setting, a woman with intense interior experiences could easily be misunderstood, even suspected of illusion or deviation. It was precisely in this situation that the manuscripts recording Saint Teresa of Avila's spiritual experiences were sent to Saint John of Ávila. Saint John of Ávila read these manuscripts with the caution of one seasoned by trial and discernment. He did not look for extraordinary external signs, nor was he carried away by emotion. He read according to a deeper standard, interior coherence, the fruits of a life of prayer, and fidelity to the faith of the Church. The writings of Saint Teresa of Ávila were placed by him under the light of long spiritual experience, where suffering, silence, and fidelity had already been tested. After this process of discernment, Saint John of Ávila reached a decisive conclusion. He affirmed that the spiritual experiences of Saint Teresa of Ávila came from God. This affirmation was not presented as praise or admiration, but as a testimony to truth. He wrote letters expressing his judgment with the clarity and responsibility of one who understood the weight of words in that context. Those lines became a shield, protecting truth amid the surrounding wave of suspicion. For Saint Teresa of Ávila, the confirmation of Saint John of Ávila was of vital importance. It did not remove every difficulty, but it gave her a solid spiritual foundation on which to continue the path entrusted to her. In an environment prone to misunderstanding, this support granted her sufficient authority and internal freedom to move forward. The reforms she initiated within the Carmelite order, which demanded courage and perseverance, were thus not extinguished at an early stage by doubts concerning their spiritual authenticity. Saint John of Ávila did not directly lead the reform of the Carmelite order, nor did he appear as a figure at the forefront of structural change. His role was more foundational. Through timely discernment, he quietly placed a firm stone upon which the reform could stand in the face of trial. This support reveals a distinctive mode of influence from behind, from depth, where decisive choices are formed. At the same time, Saint John of Ávila was also held in deep esteem by Saint Ignatius of Loyola. In the 16th century, when many prominent figures emerged along different paths, Saint Ignatius of Loyola recognized in Saint John of Ávila a fundamental affinity. It was a missionary zeal nourished by prayer and a spiritual depth inseparable from real life. Although their concrete paths differed, their meeting point lay in the seriousness of discernment and fidelity to mission. This esteem did not remain at the level of words. Saint Ignatius of Loyola at one point considered incorporating the disciples of Saint John of Ávila into the Society of Jesus. This intention reflected a realistic recognition of the spiritual and missionary similarity between the two groups. The disciples of Saint John of Ávila were formed in a spirit of evangelization, interior discipline, and fidelity to the Church, elements very close to the spirituality of the emerging Jesuit order. Although the incorporation did not take place, the very consideration of it reveals the degree of Saint John of Ávila's influence and spiritual authority in his time. Through these relationships, the image of Saint John of Ávila gradually emerges as a quiet point of reference for many major directions within the Church. He did not gather around himself a movement bearing his own name, nor did he leave behind an extensive organizational system. Instead, he formed souls, helping them recognize their own vocation and live it fully. It was precisely these individuals, supported and discerned at the right moment, who became agents of historical change. The title, Teacher of the Saints, does not arise from the number of writings or from institutional power, but from the concrete fruits of a life lived. Saint John of Ávila formed people who knew how to listen, how to discern, and how to act in interior freedom. He taught by his own life, a life that had passed through renunciation, trial, and fidelity. These lessons were not delivered as theory, but transmitted through accompaniment and example. In the journeys of Saint Teresa of Ávila and Saint Ignatius of Loyola, one clearly sees the mark of a teacher who knew how to stand behind, ready to step back so that others might move to the forefront. Saint John of Ávila understood that his mission was not to occupy space, but to open paths. It was precisely this humility that made his influence enduring, extending beyond the limits of a single lifetime. Looking back, one can see that the most important decisions in the history of the Church of the 16th century were often prepared in discreet encounters, in letters, in hours of unpublicized discernment. Saint John of Ávila was present in those moments as a silent gatekeeper, safeguarding truth and supporting what was fragile, yet chosen by God. And then one day that voice too fell silent. Yet strangely, it was precisely in silence that this life began to be read in its fullness. Some lives can only be fully understood after centuries, when the Church looks back and realizes that what was greatest took place in silence. On May 10, 1569, in Montilla, Saint John of Avila brought his earthly journey to a close. His passing was not marked by ostentatious ceremonies or events that caused public upheaval. It was a quiet ending, fitting for a life that had so often chosen to remain in the background so that others might step forward. Yet his death did not bring his influence to an end. What Saint John of Avila had sown, through preaching, formation, discernment, and the witness of his life, continued to take root in the souls of those he had touched. The spiritual legacy of Saint John of Ávila does not lie in monumental material works, but in written pages and transformed hearts. Among his writings, Audi, filia stands out as a voice that transcends time. Written largely during the days of his imprisonment, the work bears the imprint of an interior life that passed through darkness and found light within it. Across generations, Audi, filia has continued to accompany the spiritual lives of priests, religious, and lay people as an invitation to listen, to discern, and to walk in interior freedom. In the memory of the people of southern Spain, Saint John of Ávila is venerated as the Apostle of Andalusia. This title encapsulates his entire journey. He remained when he could have departed, who traveled through cities and villages when called, who preached with burning love, and who committed himself to reform through the long path of formation. Andalusia was not merely the place of his activity, but the land where his vocation was read in its fullness. From this legacy, the Church gradually came to recognize Saint John of Ávila as the patron of the secular clergy of Spain. This recognition did not arise from an administrative role or institutional authority, but from the very path he lived. He renewed priestly life by forming the intellect in union with interior life, by the witness of poverty, and by a love of God tested through suffering. In Saint John of Ávila, the image of the priest is not built on external prestige, but on daily, persevering fidelity. Many centuries had to pass before the Church officially raised his name in liturgical glory. In 1970, Pope Paul VI canonized Saint John of Ávila. This glory came late, as though the Church needed time to reread his life in the light of maturity. Canonization did not add to his holiness, but publicly confirmed before the entire people of God that the path he had walked was a trustworthy one. 42 years later, in 2012, Pope Benedict XVI declared Saint John of Ávila a doctor of the Church. With this title, the Church not only honored the holiness of his life, but also affirmed the theological and spiritual depth of his teaching as a treasure for every age. This is a theology inseparable from life, a spirituality distilled from prayer, trial, and discernment. Through this proclamation, the voice that arose from the silence of Saint John of Ávila was placed at the heart of the treasury of faith. Looking back on the entire journey, from a quiet childhood to years of fervent preaching, from prison to the role of spiritual guide to saints, from a silent death to late glory, the life of Saint John of Ávila appears as a unified whole. Every choice, whether great or small, was oriented toward a single aim: listening to the will of God and walking faithfully in it. It is precisely this consistency that has kept his legacy from fading with time. From this memory, prayer rises as a continuation of the story. God our Father, rich in mercy, we thank you for giving the Church Saint John of Ávila, a priest who chose silence in order to listen, obedience to walk, poverty to love, and truth in order to serve. Grant that we may allow our own vocation to mature in silence, know how to transform trial into light, and love the Church with daily fidelity. Through the intercession of Saint John of Ávila, preserve your priests in humility, in purity, and in burning love, so that they may become shepherds after the heart of Christ. Amen. I ask God's blessing upon all of you who have liked this video. May the Lord, through the intercession of the saints, grant you peace, health, and an abundance of grace in your lives. Return to the tabernacle. Return to the light of the Eucharistic body of Christ. Return to the moment of silent companionship with the one who awaits us in the sacrament of love. And if, in what I have shared today, you find only one or two sentences that touch your heart and draw you closer to God, then I am already fulfilled.